Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 2 o'clock, start the meeting. Can I welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live via YouTube, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. So can I just remind people that to switch their microphone on when they wish to speak and to switch it off when they've finished. And again, take this opportunity to welcome any members of the public who are listening on YouTube. If I can just say that Mr. Chapman has given his apologies today and is being substituted by Mr. Poland. We have two other absences, but I've not had any messages from them. So we've not heard from Mrs. Broadley or Mr. Mear, but they may arrive during the meeting. So if we can take agenda item 1, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of November. I propose the minutes of the meeting are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed by everybody?
Sorry, everybody.
Sorry, was that agreed? Someone else has got it. Right. That's fine. Agenda item 2, question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. No such requests have been made. Agenda item 4, to advise of any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. I'm not taking an item as urgent, but at the end of the meeting, there'll just be a brief note about the aeroplane, the Desford plane, just to give members an update. It's a good news story, but I just thought it should be something that also went in the public domain via this meeting, but we'll just take that in any other business at the end. Right, so do I have any declarations of interest in respective items on the agenda? Thank you. Agenda item 6, there are no declarations caused by the party whip. Agenda item 7, no petitions have been received. So agenda item 8 is the main agenda item today, which is the report on the Council's medium-term financial strategy 2034 to 24. That makes no sense at all, does it? 2023-24 to 2026-27. Typo on my agenda. As set out in pages 11 to 36 of the agenda pack. Can I welcome Christine Radford, who's the portfolio holder. We've got the Director of Adults Communities, John Wilson, and we have Judy Spence, who's the Finance Business Partner. So welcome to the meeting and thank you for coming along to support us. What we normally do is we normally do this in a very much prescribed way. It's quite a lengthy report. So what we will do is we will take various paragraphs at a time and then ask questions on those paragraphs as we go through. Hopefully members have been supplied with one, but I'll read out each statement as we go through. So if I could now invite John Wilson to come in, and we're starting with paragraphs. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Sure, John will want to do a general introduction and then we move into the various paragraphs. John.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, well, by way of general introduction, as you've already stated, this is the MTFS report to Scrutiny and Overview, which we do every year at this time, ahead of the report being finalised and going through Scrutiny Commission and Cabinet. The report outlines a number of areas, including our priorities in terms of our strategic priorities and how that then relates into the growth requirements for the department going forward for the next 12 months and the detail of any savings and efficiencies that we're putting forward as part of the MTFS round. Very happy to take questions on any of it as we go through. In general terms, of course, we remain, as do most councils, in a difficult position in terms of the funding of adult social care. And just over the last 2 years, that's become a heightened in terms of increased demand that we've seen coming through post-pandemic. So that does have a significant pressure on the budget, and you'll see that when we start talking about the growth factors.
Sorry, thank you, John. I'm sure all members have read the paper in detail, so I don't think you need to go through paragraph at a time. What I would suggest or ask, request, John, is that if there's any particular bits in each section you wish to highlight, if you could just highlight those. If there are no bits you wish to highlight, we can just take questions on each of those sections, if that fits in with you. So we start with service transformation, which is paragraphs 5 to 9 on pages 11 to 12. So it's just a question of any aspects you want to highlight, John.
I don't think so, thank you. I think this should be familiar to committee members. It's something you've seen before at this committee.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions on paragraphs 5 to 9? No? Right, we're now on to the proposed revenue budget, other changes and transfers, which is paragraphs 10 to 16 on pages 12 to 13, and Appendix A, which is on page 29. So again, John, do you have any bits you wish to highlight?
I'd just highlight, I suppose, the table at paragraph 10, which provides information as to the starting point for the budget for 23-24 for the department. And as members will note, what we've got there is a table just explaining how the budget is made up, the overall net budget is made up, following the prior year budget, the additions of growth, the reductions for the savings, which gives us the total of 186 million net budget. Just note, as we always do, that net budget has been compiled on the basis of no pay or price inflation. So the growth that you see there is demographic growth and growth in service pressures. It's not growth to reflect inflation. There's a central contingency which will be applied at the appropriate time to the budget to take care of inflation and pay awards. And the table at paragraph 12 just outlines how that net budget is constructed in broad terms. And I suppose the bit to highlight there is just that, as you'll see, 87% of the budget goes directly into services commissioned on behalf of local residents.
Thank you, John. Do members have any questions? Mr. Champion.
Thank you, Chair. John, this is a generalised thing. I've been on this committee 2 years now. As we go through various reports, I learn what each bits and pieces are. But when something as important as this document you're reading through, and I look at paragraph 12, you've got that list of the net budget and where the funds are coming from. I could really do with a glossary sometimes to explain what some of these things are. And it doesn't have to be much, a small paragraph on each. It could be a living document, and maybe something we just build up over the period of time. But when newbies come onto this, there are so many different things. I mean, if it was acronyms, I'm doing a planning meeting, it's just full of acronyms. We've got a page that will give a glossary that'll give us that. With this, we need a little bit more behind that. And as you go through the document, there's loads of instances throughout it. But it would make it so much easier to understand what these, I mean, care pathway operational commissioning, care pathway integration, access prevention. I don't understand what the difference is between the two, to be quite honest. And another report will come up later on in a year and it will go into detail and that, and I'll understand it. The Better Care Fund, when I got to the end of this, obviously there's quite a good description at the end, and that was great. So, but I don't want to have to see that in every report because it would fill them out. But perhaps if we just generally put something, a live document, and keep adding things to it, it'd be quite a useful document for members to use. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to have a look at a glossary of terms that we could use as you say, as a sort of a live dynamic document that we could just update on a regular basis. I'm sure we could produce that. It is, you know, when you live and breathe it, you sometimes don't kind of necessarily recognise where you get sort of technical jargon and things that the public and yourselves wouldn't necessarily understand. But yeah, absolutely happy to do that.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I take it what you're actually saying is if we had that document, it could then form a part of the back of every agenda for every meeting, and then people could just pick it up from that, which I think is agreement
And
from both
if
sides.
within a meeting, we could just say, oh, by the way, this term, could we just get that added in? And eventually, within a year, you'll have quite a Bible that people could use, and anybody sub in, etc., can pick up and immediately get an understanding of what we're talking about. Thank you.
I think we have general consensus that everybody's happy with that. So we move that forward. Thank you for offering to do that, John. That would be a great help. And again, for some of us that have been on the committee for a while, it's nice to be reminded that we need to make it easier for those that come in and sub or follow us, should the leader wish to move people around from various committees. So thank you for that, Barry. We're now moving on to, Leon, sorry.
I confess I'm not very good with finance, so I have a lot of questions. You kind of touched some of these. When you go to page 14 in the proposed revenue budget, if you see these numbers, you already said actually these numbers are not realistic, because if you see from year to year, it goes up to 2.7%, 3%. With the inflation we face now, I don't think actually these numbers are realistic. Am I wrong?
The award for inflation and the award for to take account of pay awards will be added to the budget at a later point. So the starting point for the budget never includes inflationary amounts. They are added in as an additional year. So let me try and explain, and Judith might want to support me with this one. But if you look at paragraph 13, what you'll see is that there's a detail there of £15.2 million that was added into the 22-23 budget, and it shows on the table at paragraph 10 as a budget transfers and adjustments. That included just short of £10 million for price inflation, and the same thing will happen in this year's budget. So after the net budgets and the MTFS is agreed through Cabinet, the Council will then determine what we think the appropriate inflation reward should be from April of this year, and that will be added in as an adjustment to the budget. But Judith might want to...
I appreciate that, but actually, when you look into this table, if you see the bottom line, 186, 187, 192, 194, going actually to 2026-27, this is not real.
It's real at a point in time that we are speaking about it now. It will change once the inflation rewards are adjusted.
Okay. And my next question, the last one, is actually Better Care Fund. We have been talking about Better Care Fund for many, many years now. This is 14.4% of the net budget, significant amount, 27 million. Do you have actually, I haven't seen a report where and how it is used, how the efficiency of using this Better Care Fund?
So the Better Care Fund is reported through the Health and Wellbeing Board. And the Health and Wellbeing Board is responsible for signing off the Better Care Fund plan, signing off the Better Care Fund budget, and it receives regular reports on the expenditure. It doesn't come through this committee, it goes through the Health.
A different committee. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Lee. And I think it's an interesting point. There are overlaps between the committees, as we know, in terms of how they look at things and how they're split up, which I think can be a little bit confusing. So in some ways, we all have to accept as a committee that the figure that comes in from the Better Care Fund has been appropriately scrutinised by that committee, which I think is case in point. Again, with the point you made, which I think is a fair one about the budget and is it realistic with inflation and with wage increases, etc. It can often be the case that councils do things differently. So some councils will put in a notional increase amount on the budget. Here at county, they've always taken the view they put everything in a central contingency pot and then spread it out as the case may need. Now, I think when we discussed this before, I think the logic is to give you a fairer comparison prior to those increases being added on. But as you can see from obviously this year, the amounts are substantial, with 15 million suddenly dropping into the budget to cover cost of living and pay rises that happened this year. So there are different ways that councils can do it. I think it's always been accepted here that this is probably the best way to do it. And I think one of the reasons for that is that to put a notional percentage would be quite difficult, because depending on the department, depending on the level of staff and the salaries, just having a flat percentage would probably make no sense, because you'd almost need a different ratio for each of the departments. So they've always done it this way, of to try and then mould it back to the original for that department based on the type of staff they got in terms of grade, the number they've got, the length of service the people have had. And I think in some ways, with the number of staff that County Hall employ, or the County Council employs, it's a sensible way. I think where you've got a smaller council, it's probably easier to say, we'll add on 3 or 5%, because your tolerance level is slightly different. I think Judith's nodding, so I seem to have hit the right point there. Is that right, Judith?
Yeah, absolutely. And also above pay inflation, we also have contract inflation, and that varies depending on where the contracts are. And in adult social care, we tend to get the most out of our central inflation contingency to cover that. I would add that the 4-year figures that you're talking about, the first year is the 23-24 budget. That's the most important one to focus on, and it's whether that's right. The other 3 years there are just for information and are indicative of this point in time, what we may have. But each year we bid for growth and we bid for inflation, so they will change each year anyway. So 23-24 is the important one to focus on. The other 3 are just indicative where we are now.
But again, a very fair point, Lynn. I think it just shows the complexity that the finance team at County Hall are faced with on some of these things. But I hope that makes sense to you, Lynn. Have you got any further follow-up questions you wish to raise? So, thank you for that. We're now moving on to growth, which is paragraphs 17 to 33 on pages 13 to 16. G5 to G8 and Appendix B, which is on page 31. So again, I don't know if there's any points you wish to highlight here, John.
Thank you. So yeah, just to reiterate the point that Judith's just made, really. So paragraph 19 just states that growth for the 23-24 budget is 7.58 million, and that rises up to just under 22 million over the 4-year period. That's indicative, based on what we know now, and of course that is subject to change. The process that we go through is that Judith and finance colleagues review the budgets and the expenditure each year, use a point in time, November, to have a look at what our current expenditure is and what our current demand pressures are, and then extrapolate that through in terms of looking at future growth based on demographic factors, based on national models. And then we can then identify what we think the growth requirement is for the next 12 months and beyond. But as Judy said, anything beyond 12 months is only indicative at this point, and we will obviously review that again at the same point next year, and we'll come back with firmer figures.
Hey, John, any questions from members? Leon?
It's me again. Finance and numbers. All right. When we go to paragraph 19, we say the growth required is 7.4 million for 2023-24 and 21.8 million over the next 4 years in total. I mean, I don't know about the 21.8 million, but I understand actually this reflects actually the numbers farther down in the breakdown, because if you go to page 15, paragraph 23, it is 5.9 million to 13.7 million, and paragraph 26, learning disability demand 335,000, rising to 4,255,000. Now, to me, actually, this is a massive jumps numbers. I think how exactly do we calculate actually these massive increases? Are we confident about these calculations?
Okay, well, Judith might want to talk about the confidence, but certainly in terms of how do we calculate them. So, as I said, what we do is we look at how many people are receiving a service in, say, the 1st of November of this year, and how much is that service costing us. We then take that figure and we extrapolate into the next financial year using demographic information, and subsequently for future years. So what we're doing is we're looking at what the population and demographic information is telling us about the local population, and we extrapolate forward. And we have national models called Poppy and Pansy. Getting technical again now, I'm afraid, but one model is for older adults and one model is for younger adults, working age. And we put the figures into there, and it comes out with a number that says this is what we think, based on your current expenditure and your demographic profile, the services will cost you over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years. How confident are we in that? Well, it is subject to change. So, for example, in older adults services, obviously we don't know how many people are going to develop a new long-term condition. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of frailty. We can guess using NHS data in terms of that. In terms of people with learning disabilities, we look at the numbers of people coming through children's services, because obviously people with learning disabilities develop in early in life. So we can have a look at the numbers of people that we know have a learning disability who are receiving services in children's services. We can have a look at the numbers of people who are being accommodated by the NHS in long-term care, and how many people are likely to come out of those services in the next 12 months, and how much is that going to cost the local authority. So we're making those kind of predictions all the time. What's more difficult probably is mental health and physical disability, and that's simply because it's difficult to predict how many people with any certainty will develop a mental health condition within a 12-month period that would require support from a local authority. And similarly, in people with physical disabilities, a lot of that is acquired disability. How many people are going to have a car accident? How many people are going to fall downstairs? How many people are going to get a brain injury? So what we do is we kind of just base it on the numbers that we've seen over the last number of years, and then we forecast forward based on that. But Judith, do you want to talk about how you...
The confidence is based on over the last 12 months. We look at the demand over the last 12 months, how it's changed. And I've put some graphs in paragraph 20 and 21 to see the high level, but we break it down to the type of need, the type of service user, and we could do some quite sophisticated in-year trends. That said, I can be confident about 23, 24 to a point, but if there are new service users coming in greater than what we've seen in the past, then that is where we have an overspend situation in the next financial year. I've checked, I do a check every month on this calculation in effect, and the forecast at the moment is exactly the same as I've put into this budget for this moment in time. So I'm confident at this moment in time it will be all right. But if suddenly 500 people came in out of nowhere with some need, then obviously my figures would be wrong. So we are currently slightly below the national trend. So the Popsy Pansy data that John quoted, we've checked our local data against that. We're running slightly below the national growth average in the county. So that's, again, is adjusted for it. So we're only as confident as the last 12 months, I would say, and what we think the next 3 months are going forward. Beyond that, I wouldn't like to say what would happen, because you just never know. Could be another pandemic, I don't know. So
I'm very glad you mentioned paragraph 20, because you see, I will actually find it difficult to put these numbers together, because you say the typical growth is, of service users is 1.5% per year, and however the current number is calculated 3%. Now, if every year you have 1.5%, possibly 3%, these numbers do not come together from 300,000 to 4 million. So I'm just a bit skeptical, and I would like actually kindly to ask whether you can go back to the numbers and have a look, because you see 1.5% increase in the service users, and from 300,000 to 4 million. It's difficult to put this together.
Different types of need different calculations of percentages. So the 1.5 is an average across all service users. So as John said, some of the smaller areas such as mental health and physical need, they have smaller growth factors because we don't really know. We haven't got enough trend information that's accurate to do that. The big numbers are in the service users in the older health, where it's home care and residential care. Residential care is fairly steady, so you know how many people are in there, you know the bed availability. Home care, we know how many home care hours are. So I'm pretty confident with the older adults. It's other areas where it becomes more challenging. Equally, in learning disabilities, we have those set people who come in each year from young people or new people entering this service. So they're much more static. So you know, because they've got a longer life, so they're therefore coming at 18 and they last till they're 65 in norm. So you can accurately trend that. So there will be mixes of figures, but the stuff in the earlier paragraphs are just averages. I'm happy to go through it in a bit more detail and show you a bit more. But it'll be a bit more complicated than this in this report, I have to say. But I'm happy to go through the detail.
Can I perhaps just say that I think I found this difficult when I first joined. A series of excellent questions, Leon. I think this is great for anyone listening on YouTube, because I think this is the sort of thing that we need to make sure we get out there. But there's a difference between the number of service users and the increased costs that go behind it. So you've got charts on service users, but as Judy says, if you've got 2 or 3 service users that have massive needs, they could be 150,000, 200,000 each. We know from previous meetings, this council, some of the costs we've had to incur for people who've got extraordinary disabilities, and therefore behind just a simple increase in numbers, there is the reality of the needs of those people, particularly, and we've discussed this before, with the increasing age demographic of the county, where people's needs are far higher at an older level than they've ever been for a lot of people. So in some ways, I applaud the service user numbers increase, but it can actually then give the misleading thing that if they're only going up 3%, should the budget only go up 3%, whereas the budget has gone up enormously because of the cost of delivering those services across all of the users, together with probably a lot of increased needs of some of the residents within those cohorts. And that is the difficulty. And I think what John and Judith have convinced me of over the years is that, and we know this because the way the budget outturn comes in, that they have a very sophisticated system for analysing the current patients, what their needs are, what the increases on those needs are, and the likelihood of further users having similar or greater needs, if that puts it into a bit more context. But again, should you wish any more information, again, we can certainly have that provided to this committee. And again, the proof of the pudding, I always think, is if you look back at previous years as to how close our budget has been against the actual costs we've spent. So much as it frightens me, but I think particularly you highlighted the heading above paragraph 23 of older people demand going from 6 million in 23-24 to 14 million in 26-27, which I think is just an illustration of the points that the leader of this council has continuously made to full council meetings about what is facing this council going forward and why we need to make some of the decisions across all areas that we are to ensure that we have the budget to protect the most vulnerable in our society going forward. So I'm sure Nick wouldn't thank me for saying this is a validation of his comments, because Nick would rather not have to make those comments. But I think one thing Nick has been superbly honest about is his comments to full council about the pressures on this council and therefore, you know, the impact on how we set the budget, what we put forward as council tax, and where we might need to spend money going forward. So I think that's great. So thank you for that. We have a question from Mr. Meir, who's on the screen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I was a little bit late joining. My question's on the growth, and I think you've touched on it with the 5.9 million we're proposing to spend next year, shooting up to 13.7 million in 2026-2027. That's significant growth, and that's not the only growth area. All four lines are showing growth as well. But that is actually a short space of time. 4 years is a very short space of time to spend pretty much near double the amount of money that we're expecting to do. So I know there's a paragraph, and I know some of the explanation, but I'd like to hear an explanation how we're going to get to that level of expenditure from where we are now, and what things have we got in place that actually is going to deliver for our residents in 2026 when we get there with that level of spend. Thank you.
Okay. So if I understand the question rightly, how are we going as a council? How as a council are we going to manage the level of growth that's required in and still maintain a sustainable council, I think is the question. Well, I suppose I'll point to the rest of the report, really. So we have a £7 million worth of growth requirement in 23-24. We equally have a £7 million saving target in 23-24. And the same will be true in future years. So whilst at the moment, as Judy said, the figures for the 4-year period are to some degree indicative. So £22 million growth and a £13 million saving requirement over the 4-year period. Each year, as we progress through each financial year, we sit down and we look at what saving and efficiency targets we can put forward for the next 12 months. So whilst it's sort of £7 million saving target in 23-24 and £13 million over the 4-year period, we'll be sitting here again this time next year, and I can pretty much guarantee that the £3 million that's currently in the savings column for 24-25 will be a higher figure by the time we get to the next MTFS round. So what we will be doing is we'll be looking continuously every year at what savings and efficiencies we can bring forward to balance the budget. Clearly, there are cost pressures, inflation being one of them we've talked about, pay awards being another, that we will have to address as a council alongside the demographic growth. And nationally, government will determine what they can do to bring forward additional funding. So we know that in the local government settlement this year, there was additional funding for adult social care. A number of grants were announced. We don't know the details of them all yet, but we know that there is some additional funding coming through. And again, we'll apply that. Once we get the sort of the detail of that, we'll apply that to the budget to offset some of the cost and demand pressures.
Do you wish to come back, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you very much for that one. That's really good, and it's a good thing to understand actually that the £7 million growth is actually matched by £7 million worth of savings. So actually, there's technically going to be no growth. But I'll stop there and carry on with the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. I think the truth of the matter, though, Mr. Mayor, is that we're looking at this as one part of the council. The council will determine, as it does through full council, its priorities. And it may be that, if the council decide that adults communities is more important than everything else, there may be greater changes in other departments. And therefore, what we're looking at is a year here, and we can't then correlate that to where the funding is coming from, because that is something for Cabinet first and foremost, followed by full council to determine on the totality of the budget, not just each individual one that we're looking at. So I think what we're trying to give here to this committee and to the public is a feeling of what the cost pressures in this part of the organisation will be going forward over a number of years. It's not for this department to solve it all internally, because it is a wider council issue coming forward. We're now moving on to savings, adult social care, paragraphs 34 to 58, AC1 to AC18 and Appendix C, which are on pages 16 to 21 and page 33. So going back to you, John, if there's anything you wish to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we've just alluded, savings target in 23-24 of 7.3 million, rising to 13.7 million over the 4-year period. There are a number of areas in the following kind of paragraphs which, as denoted by the star system, so the 2 stars, the 1 star, or the no stars. So a number of areas which have been in previous MTFS reports. The majority of those have been amended to take account of our latest information and data. So we've increased them wherever we can. So, for example, the Care Technology Service, which is a significant part of our savings plan, has been increased over that 4-year period as we've developed the service offer. And then there are other areas which are new and which we haven't seen in these reports before, probably starting round about paragraph 45, I think is where the new ones start. So it might be worth just focusing a bit more on those new areas. The first one being around direct payments. Talked about commissioning efficiencies, £1 million saving, rising to £1.5 million. It's a significant sum of money. But just bear in mind that this is off a budget of 42 million. So it's actually a fairly small percentage saving, although it's a big in monetary terms. We've got the commissioning of the extra care model, which is something that we've been out to procurement for, and a new contract will start in April. We've got AC11 is bringing together a number of back office and commissioning efficiencies. A couple of areas around reviewing existing care packages, so particularly around home care, domiciliary care, and particularly for people who have what we call double-handed care, which is another one of those technical terms for where you've got 2 carers assisting an individual. And we always look wherever we can when we put 2 carers in, because that's what the level of need was at the time. So perhaps somebody's discharged from hospital, they come out of hospital, they need 2 carers to mobilise. But we always try and go back wherever we can and look at whether or not the person's become more independent, could be more independent with a bit of equipment. Can we reduce the level of care and increase the person's independence? So a number of areas there around reducing levels of care where it's appropriate. And then a couple of areas from paragraphs 54 through 57 where we're looking to enhance our reablement offer. And as we've discussed many times here in committee before, the best way to manage demand for older people particularly is through an effective reablement service. So this is making that reablement service more effective than it currently is, or trying to see more people than we currently do, and that will bring longer term savings into the department.
Thank you, John. Do members have any questions? Mr. Meir, is that an old hand or a new hand? Mr. Meir?
That's an old hand. Sorry, let me just take it away.
Thank you.
I thought it would disappear, but it didn't.
Do other members have questions? I think I'd just like to comment on this one. I think in the time I've been privileged to be chairman of this committee, adults communities have made significant savings. I mean, I think the biggest success story in my time has been the target operating model, which was alluded to here. So I think, one can only imagine what the pressures would have been on adults community had the council not taken those bold decisions and moved them forward, which have achieved significant savings. Now, I appreciate that adults communities almost having to ask back for the savings they've made, but my goodness me, what a state we would have been in had we not, I said, made those savings. So I think we know that the department has a great track record in achieving savings without reducing the quality of the care. And I stress that whenever we've discussed things at this committee, it's always been that we will make savings only if we're not reducing the quality of the care, and we've done both, which I think is just my opportunity to thank all those staff in adults communities for the work they've done, and again, all the work in the finance department for supporting them through that process. Mr. Champion.
Thank you, Chair. Just one brief one on item 57, when you're talking about reducing mileage costs in effective travel time. Do we actually look where carers are geographically based so that we get them the closest to the people they need to attend to? Because obviously there's a big waste there if they're not.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what this saving will seek to achieve. So at the moment we have two services. We have the Home Care Assessment Enablement Team, HART team, and we have a Community Response, the CRS team. And traditionally, the Community Response team was our kind of crisis response. So they were county-wide, well, they are still county-wide, whereas the HART teams are based on sort of geographic locations. So we have different teams in different localities across the county. And therefore, what happens is, of course, that the community response teams rack up a heck of a lot of miles responding to whatever happens to take place across the whole of the county. What we're looking to do here is to potentially align the two teams together so that the community response service work on the same basis for geographical footprint as the HART teams, and therefore they won't have quite so big a mileage. And if you look across the council, those community response staff probably rack up the highest mileages of any staff working for the council at the moment.
Thank you for that. We're now moving on to savings, communities and wellbeing, which is paragraphs 59 to 62, AC 19 to AC 21, and Appendix C, that's page 21 and page 33. Back to you, John.
Thank you. So just a couple of things to highlight here. The first is the cessation of the Green Plaque Scheme. So this is the scheme by which we sort of award plaques based on heritage, local heritage. We've awarded a number of plaques, 36 over the last few years, but we're proposing that scheme comes to an end. It's a small but significant amount of saving, £55,000. And then the second area is the review of the creative learning service. And essentially what we're looking to do there is achieve more income through the service. It's a well-regarded service. The current level of income that it achieves doesn't cover the whole of its costs. So we're just looking to recover a bit more of the cost base.
Thanks, John. Barry.
Thank you, Chair. On this green plaque thing, as you say, in stopping the service, it doesn't impact a particular person. There's but obviously historical societies and things like that. There are a lot of people like it. Have we actually looked at changing this into a chargeable service instead? So that, because it always seems such a shame with councils as our budgets get tighter, we keep cutting and cutting and cutting, and we look like the bad boys because we're doing that. And here's something that to some people will mean a lot. And if we were to look at being able to charge for this instead, it means that we're not stopping it, but we are saying that we can't afford to carry on paying for this. But if you really want something, and I'm sure there's lots of individual historical societies in towns, etc., that would like this sort of thing to continue, and at least the options there to do it. I know you've got to look at how do you charge, etc., etc. Appreciate all of that. But it seems a shame to be losing everything because we've got to cut back rather than saying it's there, but you've now got to pay for it.
We haven't specifically looked at a charging model. I'm not quite sure who would pay, if I'm honest. We have looked at a couple of options. We've looked at sponsorship, and we've also looked at the fact that some of the district and borough councils, not all of them, but some of the district and borough have their own schemes, very similar schemes, like blue plaques in one of the councils. And so we did look at whether or not we could have a kind of a merge or a single service across Leicestershire. Neither of those two options panned out. In terms of charging, as I say, I mean, the green plaques, they bring very good public relations. They're very good from a community perspective, and certainly, as you say, those people who are kind of keenly interested, like historical societies, do get a deal from them. But from a public perspective, I'm not quite sure how far that reaches, if I'm honest. So we go through quite a big process around awarding the plaques. We go out to the public and we ask for nominations, and then we go through an awards process, and then we put the plaques. Following which, I'm not quite sure how much the public then, once the plaque's up on the wall, I'm not sure quite how much notice people give to it, if I'm honest. And so I think, given where we are with the current kind of financial position of the council, I'm not quite sure whether £50,000 is money well spent.
Yeah, and I understand that completely. I just kind of think that if we keep cutting everything and we don't give options, it's a little bit like, you know, if you go district, you look at green bins, you just say, well, we don't have to fund them, so we just stop them. What we did, and we say we charge for them, and a whole load of people come forward and say, yeah, I find that useful. I just kind of think if we just keep nailing everything on the head, it just looks like we're just cancelling things all the time, not giving any alternatives.
I think perhaps Ian's been at this point. I mean, we're fortunate we got the portfolio holder here, Christine Radford. I mean, perhaps what we can ask Christine to do is to take that thought back to Cabinet and just see what the Cabinet view on that is, to see if it's something they might wish to have a look at. I don't think we're going to be able to solve it as part of this part of the thing. So if Christine's happy to just take that back and further discussion, but we might be too far down the track. But Mr. Poland?
Thank you, Chair. My question's actually about the record office relocation. It's this said at the record office of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So that am I right in saying that therefore includes the city and the county of Rutland? If that is the case, a couple of questions from that really. First of all, do they pay us any money towards the storage of those documents? And second of all, if we're looking at relocation, have we spoken to those councils? Specifically, I would suggest Leicester City as to whether they've got any space where it could be maybe more centrally located and, dare I say, better accessed by the public.
I think before John comes in, perhaps I say the records office has I think has been discussed every year I've been leader. I mean, Christine and I have visited the place. There have been various proposals put forward by this council which have been derailed by lack of funding. I think it is still the intention, where possible, that the likelihood is that they would like to relocate it to the Eastern Annex, if possible and if funding permits. There are serious risks with the records office if we don't keep the records separately, which all the officers and certainly Cabinet are fully aware of. I know Christine briefed them as recently as the previous Cabinet meeting. So it is actively being looked at and actively under discussion. And I think everybody is acutely aware of the need to make decisions and move it forward in the next few years. But it's like everything in life. Every time the Cabinet have had a good idea, we run out the pennies to cover the capital costs of actually doing the work. So I know the leader is acutely aware of it. I know the portfolio holder is acutely aware of it. And I think it's a point well made, James. And I think another point from this committee back to and say, please don't take your eye off the ball on this one, because it will come and bite us in due course if we don't. I think John might want to add something before you speak, Barry, or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, kind of. So in answer to the first question, yes, we do get a financial contribution from the city and from Rutland councils. Obviously, they're in a similar position to us in terms of looking at their next year's budgets, and I'm aware that there are some conversations taking place at the moment as to what level those contributions should be. In terms of the facility itself, as the chair's just said, we are in the process of undertaking a review of the accommodation. The current capacity won't suffice going forward. We have looked at various options around what a new facility might look like and where that might be. But it's not, it's a very difficult facility to construct. And it's no easier, particularly whether it's an existing building that you're changing or a new building that you're building off the ground, because it's all about particular storage requirements, particular environmental controls, particular security issues. So it becomes a very, very expensive facility, whether or not that's, as I said, a change to an existing building or whether it's a new build. But we are going through that process, and if you sort of flick to the capital element of this report, you'll see that there are some paragraphs in there around that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the answers to both. I guess I've not been to the building in question, so just been my own curiosity with what is this like a museum that people can visit and we're encouraging people to visit, or is this literally a load of storage boxes that we're just trying to find storage for this thing? Do you see what is it?
It's well worth a visit, James. It's in Wigston rather. It is creaking at the seams, to say the least. It is very interesting to visit in actual fact, and I think the most impressive part about it is how dedicated the team are down there to preserving, storing these things and maintaining them. So, you know, it's a really dedicated team down there. It is open to the public. They can go and view and access the records, but John would probably agree with this, not in a way that we would ideally like them to. There's lack of parking there. As you say, it's not centrally placed, whereas, you know, perhaps this campus might be a better one because it's, you know, in the more or less in the centre of the county rather than on the outskirts. So I'm sure that officers could arrange for you to visit should you wish. It is well worth a visit, as are the museum services we operate, which are well worth a visit. Again, which I had the pleasure of going with Christine to visit the one at Barrow-on-Soar. So it's well worth doing. But I think it is. You know, I think you've said everything that we've been saying for several years, and I know that the cabinet, if they had the money, would have done it yesterday, if not 2 years before. And they're still looking for the best solution because they recognise that something will need to be done, probably not too far down the track, to get us where we need to be. So we're now moving on to, oh, sorry, Barry.
Yeah, I think the thing I'd add to that as well, when you say the importance, it's the fact that not only are we reaching capacity, but we've got quite a lot of stuff not being kept in the conditions, in the environment in which it needs to be. That's at the Records Office, at Barrow, here. And so once it's gone, it's gone. If we don't, even if we aren't able to do everything we'd like to do, we certainly need to be able to look at doing something to at least keep what we've got in good condition until we can do something with it. And I'd certainly recommend going to see it, because once you actually see everything, when you go to Barrow and you see all the dresses, 1800s, 1830s, 1850s, they're just hanging on a hanger, etc. If you've watched the thing on the V&A Museum, all that stuff's wrapped up in special tissue, in drawers, laying flat, not hanging up, so it's not being stretched and damaged. But we can't keep things in the way that it ought to be kept at the moment. And I think it's important that we keep a real eye on that.
Thanks for that, Baron. I think the comments of this committee will go back, but I think Christine wants to come in.
Can I just reassure the panel that we are keeping on top of it, aren't we, John? We are concerned, and I do keep nagging the cabinet.
I think, as we know, Christine nagging you is not something you'd ideally want in life. But I think everybody's aware, Barry, but it doesn't help for this committee to reinforce the concerns that we have on behalf of the residents and the council about it. But I think we're all singing on the same hymn sheet here. And hopefully a resolution can be found in the not too distant future. We're now moving on to savings under development, paragraph 63, pages 21 and 22.
Thank you. So here's another one for the glossary, the three conversations model. So effectively, when we talk about the three conversations model, it is a national model. It is sort of recognised within social care circles as a national model. It's been rolled out by over 40 different local authorities. Essentially what it is it's saying have the right conversation with people at the right time. And it's based on talking to people about how they could achieve some of their support requirements through their local kind of communities, through their families, through people that they know, through a strengths-based and asset-based approach, rather than seeking funding from a local authority. So it's one of those. It's a bit like the sort of when we, as the chair said earlier, talking about the target operating model and the care technology service. It's one of those where if you do the right thing, and if you sort of try and wherever possible keep people as independent as possible within their local communities, then you also achieve a saving. So that's the notion behind that, and we are looking to pilot that over the next 12 months and roll that out across the county over the 12-month period. There's another couple of areas there just briefly touched on in terms of, we talked earlier about there being a small savings target around developing the reablement service. So we've just put a little marker in here to say, actually, if that pilot that we're doing at the moment proves effective when we roll it out across the county, there could be a significant saving attached to that for next year's MTFS. And just a comment there around some of the work we're doing around digital technology and how we're trying to transform some of our service offerings, as well as the sort of systems and processes that we work with to be more efficient.
Thank you, John. Any questions for John on that area? You've got away scot-free on that area, John. So now we're moving on to health and social care integration, which is paragraphs 64 to 72, pages 22 to 24.
Yes, we touched on the BCF earlier, the Better Care Fund. We've given the detail there that hopefully makes that a bit more transparent to members in terms of what the Better Care Fund is, how much money is entailed within it, how much of that funding comes to the local authority. A significant amount of money, as it said earlier in the report, nearly 15% of our net budget. And there's obviously a significant risk should anything happen to the funding that we get through that particular fund. Just whilst we're on the Better Care Fund, and it's not in the report, but I've also, I think, probably worth just talking about an addition to the Better Care Fund that came in December of last year. So members may be aware there was a sort of a £500 million discharge grant announced in December of last year, which became part of the Better Care Fund. The Leicestershire share of that was around about £5 million. £2 million came to the local authority, £3 million went to the Integrated Care Board. That money has been spent on assisting discharge and enabling discharge from hospital specifically. A number of areas around additional residential placements, additional care management capacity, additional services to support people in the community, and recruitment and retention payment for domiciliary care staff through the winter period to ensure that we maintain sufficient capacity in our domiciliary care services. And then there was also another announcement in January of this year of a £250 million grant to the NHS for discharge in addition to that. And to my knowledge, that sort of equates to around about £3.5 million locally, which went to the ICB. And I think, and I stand to be corrected, and Tracy and others might be able to correct me, but I think that's the majority of that spend is going towards increasing the community hospital capacity for step-down beds from the UHL.
Any questions for John? Queries? Only one thing I'd highlight from this is that sometimes we give central government gets a bit of a bad rap, really. But I think one of the success stories, certainly in my time as a councillor, has been the disabled facilities grant. I mean, yeah, when I first became a councillor, the government gave very little to, whereas the amount has increased year on year. I mean, this is a fund where a lot of districts used to have to subsidise it out of their own budgets. But the main thing about this is that the way that the county work with districts on disabled facility grant, I think, is a model of two tiers of local government working together very successfully. And I think for those that have used the service, I think many people speak very highly of it. I know, speaking to one of our own councillors recently, who's had to go through the service, nothing but praise for how this operates. Generally through the light bulb project, which is run through Blaby District Council. But again, this is a county-wide partnership which works very successfully. And I think it's always worth highlighting when things are done very well, and this is done very well and has greatly added to people's lives and well-being in their own homes, and I think is something we should applaud. And I just wanted to highlight it for members of the public who might be looking in that, you know, this is not all doom, gloom and despondence here. There are a lot of good things that have been done in this area, which I think have made significant difference to people's lives. So I hope members won't mind me having mentioned that. We're now moving on to adult and social care reform, paragraphs 73 to 75. Oh, sorry. Mr. Meyer. Oh, sorry, Joe, I missed your hand going up.
Cheers, thank you very much. I was going to come back in there. On the, I agree with the disabled facilities grant. I think that's important, and I hope districts can get more of it spent, because a lot of it's sitting on district balance sheets at the moment. But I would just want to come back on what the money the government was giving us, and I think it's very important, because as a councillor we get lots of inquiries about social care and other funds. And people see the headlines on the news and they think actually we're getting all of this money, but as John mentioned, we only get part of that money, and when it is directed at local government, it's only a fraction, because obviously it has to be split between all the authorities. So that's a distinction that we have to make, and I think it will be better for us. And I think as a council going forward, if we can communicate that in some way to say actually a lot of these headline figures, what we actually get is probably a smaller piece of the pie than what people think, because when people come to us and they ask for such services to be delivered, the fallback is, oh, well, the government's giving you lots of money, you're not spending it. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Just in respect of the discharge grant, one of the other things is that colleagues that attend national NHS England calls have pointed out that we need longer term funding to support infrastructure in respect of discharge and community services, but also to enable us to recruit and retain a workforce.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think you've done it wonderfully well there, Joel, that you've highlighted it to members of the public. So I think thank you for raising it and doing that. The only thing I would say on behalf of our district colleagues is on the disabled facility grant. I know that that it's not through lack of trying they're trying to get the money out the door. It's generally lack of actually finding the appropriate people to do the building work, etc., going forward. So if we had enough builders and other such people, the money would go out the door far quicker. So that I know that everybody involved in the project is desperate to spend it, but we have to make sure we've got the right people doing the work, especially in people's homes. And sometimes, particularly if it's private rented accommodation or something of that nature, it can take a while to get permission off the landlord to do such things. So it's never as easy as it might be, but I know that everybody throughout all the local authorities is working desperately hard to get this done as fast as humanly possible. And I think just to say it's, you know, people leaving money sitting on their balance sheet is perhaps a slight misrepresentation of where people are going on that one. We're now moving on to, I've lost my place now. Oh, adult and social care reform, paragraphs 73 to 75 on page 24.
Yeah, it's really just to note the government's announcement at paragraph 75 there, as it notes the Chancellor's announcement in the autumn that the adult social care charging reforms would be delayed by at least 2 years. And obviously that does therefore remove the immediate and significant financial risk to the County Council, which was approaching £20 million. So it's just noting that that's been deferred.
Thanks for that, John. I think we all breathed a collective sigh of relief when that was deferred. I know in some ways you want reforms to come in, but the potential cost implications to the county of that, as we know on this committee, were fairly onerous, to say the least, at a time when we could do without it. Any further comments or questions for John on that one? Right, thank you. So we're now moving on to other external influences, paragraph 76, page 24.
I don't think there's much to say about this one, Chair, unless people want to ask any questions.
Any questions for John? Just seeing if John's
No.
The questions, right? Thank you. We're now moving on to other funding sources, paragraph 77 on page 25.
Again, I think the paragraph sort of stands for itself, really. It just details a number of smaller grants that fund specific aspects of the department's activity.
Any questions on that paragraph? Nope. So we're now on to the capital programme, which is the last section of this report, which is paragraph 78 to 70 and appendix D, page 25 and page 35.
Thank you. So yeah, the capital programme, we just talked about the DFG, the Disabled Facilities Grant. Of the £21 million that we have in the capital programme from an adults and communities perspective, 18 million of that goes straight to district and borough councils for disabled facilities grant. The remaining 3 million is against our social care investment programme, and we're just going through a process at the moment to review that programme, and we'll probably want to come back to committee later in this year with an update on where we intend the strategic direction for the investment programme to be going forward.
And any comments while we're on there on future developments, John? They all come as a package.
And future developments, we've got the Heritage and Learning Collections Hub, which again we've already had a conversation about. We're just going through a process at the moment to look at the detailed costings that have come forward for the current proposals. And once we've done that, we'll be bringing further reports forward. I've talked about SCIP, and then there's just a small couple of lines there that says that if some of the digital developments that we're looking at go forward, then there may well be a capital requirement attached to those.
Any questions for John? Leon?
Just very briefly, what does SCIP include? No, I'm a bit confused about that.
It's another one for our glossary, isn't it? So it's the SCIP is the Social Care Investment Programme. So this is where, as a council, we recognise that housing and accommodation plays a very important part in keeping a person independent. And we take a sort of a view of sort of no decisions about care without a decision about housing. So as a council, we've invested over the last 5 years in developing alternative forms of accommodation to keep people in the community. So instead of somebody going into residential care, for example, we develop supported living. Or instead of a person requiring a long-term care placement as an older person, we might develop extra care housing. So it's how we as a council either fund directly or influence the funding of those alternative forms of housing support that can support people in the community where they can be more independent and require less care.
Any further questions? It's an interesting area, Leon. I mean, you know, it's I know that in my area, again, we're likely to have the first dementia-friendly bungalows for many years being provided, and those sort of things are massively helpful to keeping people in the community and not just making their life better, which is the be-all and end-all of it, but also reducing costs to this council of them being able to stay independent in their homes longer. So, again, I think this is another area where you know, councils are working across the piece to try and find the right housing, and you know, all councils across the county and city are represented on a planning committee that looks at the type of housing where the need is as well. So this is one thing Leicestershire and Leicestershire does very well, is working across all councils at all levels to try and actually determine the plans to provide the best homes and the best housing that it can for people in the right location. So again, it's you know, you could spend billions on it if you have billions to spend on it, but councils I know are doing their utmost with the resources they have. So thank you everybody for that. We've now reached the end of that report. I think we have comments that we're happy to pass on to which will be passed on to Cabinet and then onto County, onto the full council going forward. So I think with that one, we'll now move on to the next report, which is the National Performance Benchmarking 2021 to 22 and Performance Report 2022-23, position as at November 2022, as set out on pages 37 to 52 of the agenda. I noticed Matt had snuck in at the back. So welcome, Matt. We have Matt Williams with us, who's the Performance Business Partner, who will just briefly highlight any areas in the report. I think if you take it, the members would have read it, Matt, and just highlight those things you think are significant to draw further attention to would be welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be back in the room for the first time for a while. Yes, this is the regular report that I bring to the committee around performance of the Adults and Communities Department. This time round focusing on the period April to November 2022. A slight change with the January report that we bring to the committee in that it also has additional focus on benchmarking our performance compared to other authorities in the recently released data. And that for this circumstance is actually 2021-22, so last year. Primarily, we focus on, as we're aware of the conversations around the glossary, the Adult Social Care Outcomes Framework, or ASCOF for short. This is a national framework for performance outlined in paragraphs 8 and 9 in your report. Around about 25 indicators, back up to its full size for 21-22. It did reduce a little during the first few years of the COVID period. So I'll quickly run you through a few highlights from that report, starting at paragraph 10. We're looking at people aged 18 to 64 with a learning disability. There's 2 metrics in the framework relating to that. The first of those is about employment, the proportion of people in employment. In Leicestershire, that figure is 9.2%. And when we rank authorities with social care responsibilities, 150 authorities in the country, we are ranked in the top 25% of authorities. The top quartile, again, another terminology, but top quartile is the top 25% of authorities. There's a second indicator for people aged 18 to 64 with a learning disability, and that relates to those in a settled accommodation. 85% of people in Leicestershire are in that circumstance, in that form of accommodation. It's not quite in that top quartile this time round, but is notably higher than the national average, which is 79%. Moving briefly on to paragraph 11 and permanent care admissions. Again, start off with the people aged 18 to 64. Very low, just 26 people were admitted permanently during 2021-22. And again, that put us in a rank in that top quartile of authorities in the country. For people aged 65 and over, it was higher. We were higher than the national average, and bear in mind we need to be low for this one. It's about permanent placements. So we were higher than the national average for people over 65, but it's worth noting that we were actually in line with the East Midlands kind of rate. So whilst we're above the national rate, we were in line with what was within the East Midlands. Moving on, paragraph 12, I think we've already noted in the previous report about the helpfulness of re-ablement, the re-ablement service. There are 2 metrics in the ASCOF that cover re-ablement. The first of these look at how many people, what proportion of people are living back in their own home 3 months or 91 days following a period of re-ablement. 89% of people in Leicestershire are in that circumstance, and that is again in the top quartile, top 25% of authorities. And the second metric touching on re-ablement looks at people who, having gone through a period of re-ablement, say roughly 6 weeks of service, do they need any ongoing further service? Now, during last year in Leicestershire, 90% of people didn't need any ongoing services. Their re-ablement meant that they were fully independent from our services at that point in time. And 90% again puts us into that top 25% of authorities. Finally, just in terms of the strong areas of performance in ASCOF, the Council's continued use of direct payments and personal budgets, both for carers and people who use our services, is high and above the national averages. So where in the ASCOF is performance more challenging? Well, it's certainly around the statutory surveys. So we have 2 surveys that we do, firstly for people who use our services and secondly for carers. And paragraph 14, I think it is in the report, which touches on the statutory surveys, picks out in particular two metrics, one about finding information and the other about having social contact. Finding information, 57% of service users stated that they found it easy, and similar question to the carers, 49% said they found it easy. And having social contact, you'd imagine this was a reduced level of performance based on the previous couple of years. 37% of service users said they had social contact as much as they would like, and 25% of carers. Now, it has come down nationally, so whilst we have come down in Leicestershire, it is a national issue. It's just that we remain in the bottom. So I talked about the top quartile, some of those are the metrics. When it comes to some of these survey responses, we're actually ranked in the bottom quartile, so the bottom 25% of authorities. Briefly moving away from the ASCOF for a moment, the Care Quality Commission inspects the quality standards of our contracted providers. This is outlined in paragraph 17. Leicestershire, pretty much in line with the national position. So in terms of residential and nursing homes, 79% of homes in Leicestershire are classed as good or outstanding, and this compares to 81% nationally. And then for our providers of home care, just the other way around. Leicestershire, 87% are rated as good or outstanding, and that compares to 86% nationally. So very similar across the country, and Leicestershire in there. So I'll move briefly on to the current year, 22-23. So this is from April of last year through to the coming March. And I'll turn our attention to communities and wellbeing, starting at paragraph 19. Heritage visitors continue to improve. Physical visitors totaled 98,000 during the period April to November of last year. Now that's higher, as you'd imagine, than the previous year, which still was picking up the disruption through from COVID. But to give you some context to that, the April to November position in 2019, so that's before the pandemic came in, there were 110,000. So 98,000 last April to November, 110,000 for that equivalent period of 2019. Similar picture for library services. So we've seen that if we include both physical and website visits, there were 516,000 last year in April to November. That compares to over 700,000 pre-pandemic. And if we were to look at the physical visits, I know we started splitting out the physical and the website visits in the previous meeting. If we look at physical visits, we're looking at 351,000 between April and November of last year. And that compares to around about 600,000 pre-pandemic. So again, you can see that whilst numbers are improving, we are only 3 years post-pandemic. We've some way to go to get back to where we were. We set targets for a lot of things across performance, including libraries and heritage. And we've set milestones to see if we're on track to meet that full year target. And at the moment, I can say that for both heritage and library services, we are on track to meet this year's targets. Quite difficult to set those targets earlier in the year, given the position we've come off from the back of the last 2 years. Volunteering is another key area for us in performance terms, and both at heritage and library sites. And we set a target for the full year of 10,200 hours of volunteering, based again on where we've been in the previous couple of years. We're already achieving that. It's been a really good bounce back in terms of the number of volunteers in heritage and libraries. We've actually had 11,000 hours of volunteering between April and November of last year. But again, just to give you a little bit of context in that, the April to November period 2019, pre-pandemic, that was actually 19,000. So again, you can see lots of good improvement going on, a little way to go to get back to where we were. So we'll just pick up the adult social care position in the current year. So again, we're talking about this April to November position. Areas such as carers' personal budgets, safeguarding outcomes, people living at home 3 months post their kind of reablement services, which we've touched on. These are all areas where a good high level standard of performance is continuing in the current year. There are some areas where our performance has perhaps dipped slightly compared to where we've been. And we include in that permanent admissions of people aged 18 to 64. We saw how low that was in the previous year. It's a little bit higher this year. Services post-reablement, I talked about 90% of people not needing services post-reablement last year. That's down at about 86% currently. And then on the other hand, we do have areas that are improving. And those include, going back to permanent admissions into residential nursing care, we're actually seeing, or forecasting, should I say, a lower number of people aged 65 and over going into residential care potentially this year. Other areas of improvements are reviews of people in long-term services. So these people who've had a service continuously for, say, 12 months or more, and are they being reviewed in a timely fashion? Well, in Leicestershire, last year it was 67% reviewed in the previous 12 months. That's improved to 76% between April and November of last year. And again, for a bit of context, that position nationally is 55%. Finally, just in the report, just to make for reference, really, it makes reference to the forthcoming Care Quality Commission Assurance Programme, which will be inspecting local authorities in terms of their adult social care provision. The data and the figures that you've seen, the benchmarking that we've touched on in the report, this is all helping to provide feedback in supporting the development of self-assessments and creating evidence base, highlighting the good areas of performance that I've touched on, and also those areas that are more challenging. Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome any questions or comments.
Thanks, Matt. I think you're going to have a full house by the looks of it. So I'm trying to work out who got their hand up first. So I think I'll just work down the line and start with Barry, followed by James, followed by Leon.
Thank you, Chair. Going paragraph 6, when we're looking at these two statutory surveys, what percentage of feedback is that on the surveys that have gone out? How many replies?
Thank you. Yes. They're national surveys, so we have quite a strict set of rules to comply to and processes to follow. And we send out somewhere in the region of about 1,500 surveys, and we get around about 300, 25 to 30%. That meets the targets that NHS Digital set us to achieve, and all authorities do have to meet that. So yeah, around about 300 back.
James. Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the cultural side of things, the visits to heritage sites versus online visits to heritage sites. I was really wondering, and I appreciate in my question is going to be suggestion it costs money that we don't have, but what's the potential of that? I mean, we talked earlier about the records office. Can I go online and access what's in our records office? And if not, could that be a way forward where actually instead of encouraging people to come physically to the Eastern Annex or wherever it is, that actually we encourage people to access online where you're likely to get a higher take up of people being able to do that. And then literally just that would then save space in terms of just having the physical place as a physical storage rather than sort of a quasi museum. And likewise with websites for libraries, to what extent can I borrow books online? What can I do online? Is it literally just for information? And again, is there more there that could be done in terms of being able to access material online? And you might tell me that that's already the case, but again, if that is the case, then maybe about publicising that, because I'm not aware of that.
Absolutely, yes. So we are digitizing more and more records all the time, and both individually as a council, we have a program to digitize records, but we also work with some partners as well who sponsor some of that work. So some of the sort of the national heritage sort of family tree type organizations, for example, will sponsor us to digitize records because it's in their interest. And we do encourage people to go online. We do want people to go online. With the records, we do also, though, have to retain a physical copy. We can't sort of digitize something and then sort of get rid of the original. We're not allowed to do that. We have to keep the original as well, which is, you know, as you'd expect, I suppose. And with the libraries, yes, we do have digital downloads. You can download copies of magazines, newspapers, books, all sorts of things digitally. So we do encourage that.
Leon.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to congratulate you, because actually to be in the upper quartile for so many metrics, this is a remarkable achievement, outstanding. But also I'm here to give you some hard time. It is the bad time. So I would like to concentrate on paragraph 15, safeguarding alerts and inquiries. Now, it is an uncomfortable paragraph, this one. 777 per thousand of population for us, compared to 555 per thousand per 100,000 of population in East Midlands. This is actually 40% above the average for East Midlands. I know in the next sentence you compare, you know, East Midlands with the Northeast, yeah, but it sounds a bit like, you know, let's compare with the worst. But actually, when we go to East Midlands, 40% above in safeguarding alerts is pretty significant. And I don't know why this is happening, to be honest. This question number one. And then as we go down to this paragraph, it says 13% of alerts were dealt with an inquiry, which is lower than the average for East Midlands, which is 34%. And the explanation is that this is because of the high volume. I'm not 100% sure, is the volume, or they didn't really qualify to go to an inquiry? It's another question. But then the last sentence, again, says the number of alerts are going down by 15%, the number of inquiries by 30%. So this is actually 2 times more than the reduction in alerts. So all these numbers here raise actually an alert for us. Something is not right here. We have quite a lot of safeguarding alerts compared to the local, the area, and at the same time, the inquiries are not robust enough in terms of proportion, I guess. And the trend is not right. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Good set of questions there. And John, like I said, will step in also. I don't work for social care, so John will pick up some more of the more detailed stuff around that. I think the bit around alerts at the start of that paragraph that you first picked up on, where we've got the rate of 770,000 against an East Midlands rate of 555. The definition, the guidance we're given around alerts is nothing as detailed as what we have with inquiries. Again, qualified to talk about inquiries for safeguarding for adults, but for alerts, it's a much softer definition, and perhaps in Leicestershire we have more of a wider thought on that, so we may be pulling more data into our figures. That could be one reason. I know it's something that we're aware of and that we've flagged, and is potentially going to be looked at, is what do we define as a safeguarding alert when somebody makes a call to the customer service centre and raises a concern. Are we pulling more in than we should be, or compared to other people? So that is something from a data perspective, necessarily a social care process perspective. If there's anything further to.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I think what this alludes to largely is how we apply thresholds. And again, it's one of those areas where the glossary might help. So, the difference between an alert and an inquiry, for example. So an alert is when we receive a contact that gives us cause for concern, and we would class that potentially as an alert. It would only become an inquiry if we then determined that there was a safeguarding investigation to undertake. And that depends on your use of thresholds, but what you deem to be a safeguarding, as opposed to something which is just a cause for concern. And that will be different in different authorities. Different authorities will have different thresholds. That's the first thing to say. The question, of course, then comes back, well, how do you know your thresholds are adequate and that you're keeping people safe? I think that's probably something that we could do here in terms of a further report this year. I think it's probably a couple of years since we've had a report on safeguarding. I think Tracy probably did the last one, and that would have been at least 2 years ago. So I think we could probably bring a report back, a more detailed report in terms of our safeguarding activity. It'd probably also be timely because we have a new independent chair of our safeguarding board who starts this month. So it might be that we could invite the chair of the safeguarding board to come along to committee, introduce herself, and at the same time take a report on how we are fulfilling our safeguarding responsibilities and give you an opportunity to have a bit more scrutiny.
Sorry, just to complete the question, because you see the response to this question makes me a bit more anxious than before, because you see we are talking effectively about criteria to classify something as safeguarding alert, and then another set of criteria to progress the alert into an inquiry. And as you say to me, this difference between authorities, which makes actually a comparison, for example, with the Northeast, meaningless if we have actually different criteria to classify something like an alert and different criteria to progress the alert into inquiry. I think actually that we need to look into this in the future, if I may, Chair.
I'll bring Tracy in a second, but I think that John's made the point. I think it's right. One of the things we always look to do through this committee is to find items for further investigation, discussion by the committee. So I think I think if all members are comfortable, that would be a sensible one to have a further detailed report back on, which John has already offered. We have space on our agenda for future meetings, so it would seem sensible to do it that way, but I'll bring Tracy in.
Yes, I was just going to say, historically, there's been some work that was being considered at a national level regarding application of thresholds. And if I remember correctly, and it is a while ago now, when I had the lead for safeguarding, our threshold document was recognised as being quite positive. And so it was about replication across other local authorities applying the same types of threshold to converting alert to inquiry. So it might be worth picking up with Prisca, our current lead practitioner for safeguarding, that work's progressing.
Barry?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm just coming back on my original thing. We were talking the percentages. Obviously, it's only a 20% response on the survey. I think it'd be quite useful in the report if that were in there, so that we understood the numbers. Because the reality is when people have a problem and have an issue, they'll feed back. If people don't have a problem, an issue, they tend not to. So what you could get as a slant on the figures, because, you know, when people protest, the press say 100,000 were out on the street, well, 69,900,000 weren't, is the reality. And I think it would help if we had, out of 1,500 surveys, 300 replied, 20%. That would give us a feel of what that feedback is then.
Right, any further questions, Christine?
Well, mine's not a question. It's to, I think it was to James. I can't remember whether it was James or Barry, about online things with the 1620 house that we've got. We've been doing online things where they could go in and have an experience for people that can't get. And actually, it was very, very interesting. So we are doing more and more of that type of thing to make people more aware of what we're doing. It's amazing, really, what we do as a county. I think, you know, I'm learning more and more since I've been in this role as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the questions. Sorry, James.
No, just to comment on what Christine said, I very much welcome that. I think that getting things online makes it more accessible for people. First of all, that maybe don't think. I mean, I'm a county councillor in 2017. I've never visited the records office. I think I will after this meeting. It was something that would very much interest me to do. If I could access it online, that'd be great. And of course, beyond Leicestershire, John talked about genealogy sites, I think you said, sponsoring. I can imagine Ancestry and others would be interested in this, so that globally people whose ancestors are in Leicestershire but maybe live elsewhere in the country or indeed elsewhere in the world could have the same sort of access without having to come obviously all the way to Wigston. So yeah, just welcome that. Thank you.
I think once you see the records, James, you'll realise how long the digitisation programme might take and how difficult it is, bearing in mind the different shapes and sizes of almost every bit of paper in there. I mean, it is fairly terrifying, and I suppose from some experts in this field, they tend to like to go there because obviously they can flip from one to the other perhaps easier than they can on digital media. But no, it is well worth a visit. Thank you for the comments. We clearly have an action coming out of this discussion, which is to look to have a further report either at the next meeting or one after into safeguarding. I think their point's well made, Leon. Part of me actually thinks that the higher the number, actually, the better in some ways it is, because it shows that our team are actually saying we don't want to miss something that could be a risk. So to actually have a low number would almost imply to me that we are missing things rather than we had some more false flags, but we made sure we caught everyone that was a risk than not having the false flag. So I'd perhaps tend to look at it the other way around. I'm not too worried about a higher number. It might be our staff are being a bit overcautious, but I don't think you can be overcautious with people's safety and safeguarding. So perhaps there is a happy medium we need to meet, and that's where we will be able to dig in further when a further report comes back following this discussion. So thank you for that. We now move on to the last agenda item of today. Oh, sorry, Matt, I forgot to say thank you before you disappear. So thanks, Matt. It's lovely to see you in person rather than on screen. So great for that. Agenda item 10 is the final substantive item, which is the outcome of the consultation on eligibility for care technology services. The report can be found on pages 53 to 70 of the agenda. And I think Tracy is taking this one.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this report is to provide feedback on the consultation in respect of eligibility of residents for care technology services, and to seek approval that any proposed changes are implemented after going to Cabinet on the 1st of April. So the new care tech service, CT, going forward was implemented on in April 2022, having already had a business case signed off in February 2021. The service recognises the importance of assistive technology in enabling people with care and support needs to lead independent and fulfilling lives. John alluded to in the MTFS report that there are significant savings attached to the use of care technology in supporting us to support people to be independent as possible. Since the launch of the new service, there's a discretionary repair and maintenance service that's been provided. And this is deemed not to be sustainable because of the increase in statutory provision. So it's proposed that requests for such repairs and maintenance or legacy equipment be considered as a part of the care and support review, and that consideration to such request is in line with the Care Act, so ensuring fairness to all those that access the service. Previously, the committee had considered a report on the 7th of November regarding the consultation on eligibility for care tech services, and a list of the consultation questions were discussed. So currently, the care tech services offers a range of different equipment that focuses on falls protection, bed and door monitors, and 24/7 responses. People who've received care and support services in the past, including CT, will be assessed as part of the care and support review. And if a person's not eligible for such services going forward, we will assist them to access other organisations. Paragraph 10 outlines the process in respect of progress to date regarding the care tech service. So just to give you some context, the council has an amount of older legacy equipment that was generally provided for people who were deaf and hard of hearing. It's estimated that there are around about 8,000 legacy pieces of equipment. Since the launch of the care tech service, we've provided that discretionary repairs and maintenance service. Legacy equipment is no longer provided by our equipment provider going forward. So from the 11th of November to the 9th of December, we undertook a 4-week consultation that involved a range of different methodologies. So use of the council's social media, people were written to, there was online assessments, offers were made to local groups in respect of outlining those current proposals or future proposals for delivering legacy and non-eligible services. And after the consultation closed, we received a letter from the British Deaf Association, and we subsequently made an offer to have a face-to-face meeting with a British Sign Language interpreter present. So Steve's going to take you through the consultation findings, all of which in detail can be found in Appendix A. And then what we'll do is take you through the proposals and the timeframes for implementation. Afternoon, Steve.
Afternoon, everybody. So as Tracy said, we ran this consultation through various platforms, social media platforms, our website, and we specifically wrote to all of the people who'd had that legacy equipment. The legacy equipment is the older kit, more standalone kit that we just go and install, or used to go and install under the old assistive technology service. So we made sure that we tried to directly target those people who'd had that particular service. And I had quite a few phone calls from people who'd received the letter about the consultation stuff. So we had 49 responses. The majority of those were back online. We had 2 postal responses, and we allowed for the postal strikes that were happening at that particular time. So the majority, you'll see, this is about paragraph 22. Most of the responses were from individuals. We also had the RNID as well, and a couple of other organisations. The majority saying that they had a disability, and we were trying also in the consultation to get a bit of feedback about other services that repair services that people had used that nobody had. They'd all used our old assistive technology service. The feedback on that was very good. It was very, very heartwarming to read how well that service had come across to people and delivered that particular service, and it continues to do so with the new equipment. So We asked people to respond to the proposed approach, which was instead of having a discretionary service where people just phoned up and just issued the kit irrespective of their care and support needs, that we wanted to see how people felt about having a care and support assessment review as part of the eligibility criteria that we use for the new equipment, and apply that to the legacy equipment, particularly for the repairs and maintenance when we get requests for that. And we had a mixed sort of response there. We had 41% saying yes, it was supported, with comments such as yes, those who can afford to pay should pay. Those most in need, recognition of the pressures on the council's resources. 49% tended to disagree or strongly disagree. It's always difficult when you're saying to someone, here's a service that you're used to. We are asking you what would happen if we didn't deliver the service in the same way. So seeing paragraph 27 about the impact of those proposals, if someone was ineligible, we'd still do the assessments under the options proposed. But people were saying it would impact on their independence, and the affordability for some people was an issue. And the national charity, the RNID, was saying having that essential equipment for people with hearing loss not provided as part of the blanket policy. They had issues about enabling people to remain safe and independent in their own homes. So as I say, there were more supportive comments as well. And when it came to charging for a service, 12% agreed, 38% strongly disagreed, and 23% tended to disagree. The majority of people, again, there were concerned about affordability. And we had comments such as the council installed the equipment, it should be up to them to repair that equipment. Increasingly, some of that older equipment is not economic to repair, it's just a replacement. As I mentioned earlier, affordability was mentioned in the responses, with a third saying they were not very likely or not at all likely they could afford it. But interestingly, 40%, which was 12 people, stated it was fairly or very likely they could pay. And then the remainder didn't know whether they would be able to afford it or not. So again, sort of mixed comments there about what we should do or what the impact would be. And we also asked if a person was no longer eligible for the support, how that would impact them, and 36% said it would impact them to a great extent, and 50% to some extent. Again, comments varied, and we also asked for additional comments, and some people obviously wanted the status quo, some felt the decision had already been made. Some people actually felt they were unaware that they had the service until they received a letter from us, and some people wanted other support and specialist equipment to live safely and independent in their own homes. So from some of the phone calls, it was evident that we weren't just the only supplier of some of the equipment. They were obviously getting equipment from the NHS for some of the people. So considering all the responses, sat down, had a look at how that would impact on some of the options that we could do. We could continue to provide the service, the repairs and maintenance service for legacy equipment using the existing resources from the team. The issue with that is it means that we would be running a dual system as we currently are, one for discretionary service depending on the type of person and their disability, and another one for people who went through a review and were assessed for care and support. So we'd have that two-tier system. The other thing that would impact as well, we'd have to use the resources from the team. There isn't the budget in there to extend that, so it would have to come out on the current service, which would impact the new service and the business benefits and financial benefits that's aiming to do. So option 2 was slightly different. This was about extending the current resources for demand, and also looking at the equipment again. That we'd have to have an equipment budget. Again, it runs into the similar sort of issues to the first one. Creates that two-tier system. You'd still have to meet the costs in some way from existing budgets, and it would reduce the cashable benefits in the original business case. The third option was, well, let's have a look and see whether we can commission a specialist repairs and maintenance service, a service partner. Again, we're constrained on the budget side. We'd also have to manage that provider as well. And it may not be possible to find an organisation. I've done quite a bit of searching trying to find specialist organisations. Most of them are more generalist. And options 1, 2, and 3, they don't achieve the council's objectives or ambition what we have for the use of the care technology going forward. As I say, operating that dual model as well. So that leaves us with a preferred option, which is to align the criteria for repairs and maintenance of legacy equipment with the new care technology offer. So everything would be on the same basis. It would be subject to care and support assessment and review against the Care Act eligibility criteria. It provides that equitable basis. It's very clear, it's very fair across the service, and those not meeting eligibility criteria would be signposted to other available support. And there's some examples of the types of cost of some of the equipment we're talking about there. And since the meeting with the lead member, I've put something together so that it's currently out in draft, so that we can give that to frontline staff so that they know they're much more aware of the types of care technology that are available on the consumer market, what's available from the districts, what's available from other sources of advice and guidance. The timetable now is to look to go to Cabinet on the 10th of February. As I mentioned, option 4 is the preferred approach, to move to a basis of eligibility. Now, we know for some people that will be unpopular, but in the current economic climate, and to try and deliver some of the benefits that we know that the care tech service can deliver, this is why we're supportive of that option. So I'll stop there and if there's any comments.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Tracy. James?
Thank you. Really, my question, I guess, is around the survey itself. Notice it said 49 respondents in Appendix A, and it says it in the body of the report. And paragraph 16 says we wrote to 1,130 people, in addition to promoting it on social media and so forth. I mean, like Leon, maths is not my strong point either, but I reckon that's about 4% of those we wrote to for the letter. I guess we can do what we can to promote it, and it sounds like we've done that. But to what extent is 4% a representative sample? I guess, and are we basing, and a bit like Barry said earlier, is it likely those 4% are the ones that have got sort of that are unhappy with the service more, because they're the ones who are likely to respond? So I guess my general question is, to what extent can we use that percentage to extrapolate general happiness or unhappiness with the service more generally?
In respect of the number of people that we wrote out to, that involves people that we would have provided services for in the past. So people that are on records of having received support from the previous assistive technology team. We did use, as you stated, a number of different methods to seek feedback. Social media, like I say, writing out to people, writing to organisations that support deaf and hard of hearing people. It's not a good response, but I think, like we said, it may be an indication of those people that have said, actually, I'm not satisfied with your proposals, but I understand why you're considering having to do it. And I think the bit that's really about making this clear is it brings everybody in line with the same eligibility criteria. So it's about fairness and equity to the service. And those people that have received those services historically, i.e. the legacy equipment at the discretionary process, will be subject to a care and support review.
Thank you, Chair. Just to correct one thing, I'm pretty good in maths. I'm a statistician. I don't understand accountancy. It's a mystery for me. Right. Now, it is a bit of a general question, this one. I'm a huge fan of care technology. I think it's the future. Now, in February 2021, NHS England produced a document. I'm sure you know about the document because you mentioned some parts of it. Stating actually there is a problem, and it will be even a bigger problem with the elective waiting list. Before COVID, it was 4 million. After COVID, 6.6 million. Within the next 5 years, we'll go to 14 million. And there is a lot of emphasis and quite a few points by the NHS England. How can we address this major challenge? And one of the major points is about care technology. So for the NHS to address actually this major challenge coming to us, they looking deeply into care technology. Other social services are looking into care technology. How these two services align each other because you're partners?
Yep, members will be aware that we have a strategic partnership with Hampshire and PA. As part of that strategic partnership approach, we have built within the contracts agreement to look at strategic objectives over a period of time. It'd be fair to say that Steve, at a local officer level, is more connected to the digital NHS England drivers. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to pick up some of that work that's kind of advancing, but I think you're absolutely right. Things like virtual wards will include the use of technology and feedback in respect to people's health conditions. We're looking at how we can build those things into where we're assessing that got joint health and social care needs and how we can deliver care technology to meet those health and social care needs. So reducing the impact of cost to the local authority and NHS partners, but also looking at how we maintain independence and safe delivery of healthcare services. But I'll bring Steve in because he's closer to that in respect of day-to-day management.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And yeah, the NHS are very much working with us as well on care technology, and we're working also, also with the districts, trying to maximise the resources that we've got across the piece. So I helped develop the bid for the Integrated Care Board for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland with our health partners. That was put together. Each ICB has got to put together a 3-year plan. That 3-year plan involves connecting up care homes that are not currently connected, making sure that they can access some of the health records safely and securely. But also 2 elements of that bid were to do with care technology. One was to do with force sensors, and the other one is to do with innovative care technology. So in LLR, our bid included there are various targets for us to bring care homes on board, to work with various care homes to get those force sensors in, and the discretionary element. Leicester City had already got a project underway for what's called cobots, and in effect they're like a mechanical skeletal thing that appears over you can put over your body, so it helps people lift people in and out of bed, for instance. It's particularly for that, and they're currently evaluating cobots. Hampshire have already done that. So yes, we have worked closely with our health partners on their, let's say, on their steering group for the digitising of social care programme that's currently with the NHS.
Before I go to Amanda, I must just apologise, Steve, for calling you Barry earlier. I don't know why. I can only put it down to old age infirmity and the fact I need some assistive technology. But Amanda.
Yeah, just in terms of the options that are presented, I mean, I think option 4, levelling that playing field in terms of eligibility, it can only be the right way to go, can't it?
And, you know, I feel that that absolutely, you know, is the right way to go on that.
Amanda, any further questions or comments? Well, the question before us really, and I think it's up to us. I think Amanda has made the point I would have made, that I don't see the option to option 4. I think we've got to be fair. We've got to provide those services we should, and you know, the more discretionary services that we provide, the less the more we take away from elsewhere. So, are the committee comfortable adding our recommendation to this one, that option 4 is the way that Cabinet should consider going?
I have a different view, Chair.
Yeah, Joel, speak.
Cheers, thank you. I just looked through the list and what it involves and the people it will impact and the time it will impact these people. And we're going through a cost of living crisis, and we want to remove smoke alarms or not maintain smoke alarms from some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think we should go for option 4. I think we should carry on maintaining them. Their legacy, it'll dwindle, it'll go to 0 eventually because we're not replacing them. Yeah, it's a tough one, but I think we should carry on maintaining them. I think the people who we withdraw these from or won't be able to be in a position to replace some of them, so they'll have a poorer standard of living, probably a dangerous standard of living if it's like smoke alarms, for example.
I think it's like anything, Jordan, you know, if you extend it to other people, what about other people that come on board? But I take your point. Unfortunately, as you're not here in person, clearly you can't vote, which I don't know if you're aware of, but are the rest of the committee comfortable that we put it forward, that we go for option 4? Yeah, so unfortunately, Joe, it will go down as unanimous because obviously you've...
No, not to worry. I think I got my point across though. You didn't have to make that point, but I got my point across.
And I think of the other points there, I've lost them now. Where have they gone? Conclusions. Are we all supportive of the rest of the conclusion? Yep. So thank you all for that. So that's the last substantive agenda item today. I did just say before we finished that we would mention that we were looking for. We actually own an aeroplane, and we owned an aeroplane. This council, which I've never heard of it. It's a Reed and Sigrist Desford airframe, and the council has long been finding a way to deal with this and to keep it in the public display. So it has been passed to the Newark Knots and Links Air Museum at Newark, and it's a lovely little leaflet here. So a success story for this council again, that it spent a long time. We discussed it at this committee several times over the years, and COVID then intervened. There is a little leaflet here where you can read about it, 4 pages. But again, I think it just shows the concern and commitment of this council, that it has preserved a unique historic asset and got it to the right place where it can still be viewed by the public. So again, congratulations to our team and Christine, who flew it up there personally. Well, that's what she told me. That may not have been the case, but what can I say? No, we've just given it away. So we did have an Air Force, but we no longer do. The date of the next meeting is scheduled to take place on the 6th of March at 2 p.m. At least it's missed my birthday this year. And there are no urgent items, so I declare the meeting closed and thank everybody for their very valuable contributions and the time they've taken going through it today. So thank you all.